Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vanya's Coding Academy. Um, I just thought, since I keep getting a whole lot of questions and asks on Tumblr about stat bars and creating character pages and how to make the stat bars functional, etc., I would just go ahead and do a video on it once and for all so that I can kind of show you guys how to do it. It's so much easier for me to just show you and walk you through it in a video rather than having to type everything out and take 100 print screens to do so. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. And I also think it's important that I don't just give you like a blueprint. I kind of want you guys to understand what you're doing, why it works, and how it works so that you're not just copying my code, you kind of understand how everything works. I also got an ask recently where someone asked me if I could show you how I created this character card that I had featured in my previous video. Now, unfortunately, I have lost that code or deleted the code of that particular card design, but I have created a similar one right here. So today I'm going to show you and walk you through how to create this character card design, as well as how to create a stat bar and then make it functional using JavaScript. And I've also tried to make my screen smaller this time because I know when I was recording my whole screen, it was very hard to see and very hard to go along, I think someone said. So I tried to record just a smaller part of the screen. I'm hoping that this will make it easier for you guys to follow along, but I guess we'll see. So first things first, let's just go into Twine. I've got the template open right here. And I moved aside these stat page examples that the template came with, and I've instead created this new character codex passage. And I've also made sure to tag this with character codex. By adding a tag to a passage, you make sure that this particular div element that is created for each passage has a class of whatever you tagged it with, as well as that tag included in the ID. So that makes it easier for you to create styling in your CSS that's only applicable to this particular passage, if that makes any sense. So let's just get into it. First thing, I'm just going to create the headline of character codex the same way that I had it. And then I'm going to create a div with a class of container, first of all. This doesn't really have anything to do with the actual card design directly, but it's just there in case you want to have more than one card and them to sort of be in a grid system. Let me show you how that would work. So in this case, it would look kind of like this. So you could have more than one card laid out. But for this first round, we're just going to focus on the one card. So this card basically consists of this whole card element right here. And then we have this content element right here, which is divided into two. This is the left part, this is the right part. And then underneath that, we have the stat bar. So first, I'm going to create a div with a class of card. That's going to be the entire card. Inside of that, I'm going to create another div with a class of content. This is just going to be like a container for these two elements so that we can make them laid out next to each other like this instead of underneath each other the way it normally would be. And inside of here, we're going to create one div with a class of left and one div with a class of right. That's going to contain the right content and the left content, basically. You can call your classes whatever you want. This is just how I make sense of everything. Inside of the left container right here, I have this little icon slash avatar design. So I'm just going to create a div with a class of avatar. You could, of course, put anything you wanted in here. Maybe you have some artwork of your character. Maybe you have an image you want to use, whatever. I just created a style where I put the character's initials in here. So for me, that would be I, because my name is Ingrid. Now, instead of this right container, we're going to put the name, some facts, and a little paragraph description. So for this, I'm going to put an h3 tag with the full name. This is my full name. If you Google me, you will know how insanely boring and uneventful my life has been. So go off. I'm gonna say 27 because I'm 27 years old. I'm gonna say female and I don't know, human, because I am almost positive that I'm fully human. So let's go with that. Then we're gonna create a paragraph tag with just some stuff in it. I'm just gonna say Ingrid is 5 feet 2 inches. Is that how you? I honestly don't know. I could just say 160 centimeters because that's how we say it in Europe. With pale skin and currently sort of copper red hair. Now I think we should be able to see this come together. Now this is obviously already styled, but I'm going to walk you through the styling afterwards. We also want to tag this with no brackets. The stupid brackets in Twine. So annoying. Alright, it looks a little bit better now. And now we want to add in this stat section right here. Now the stat section we want to make sure is outside of this content div, because we don't want it to be flexed the way these elements are. We don't want the stat bar to be over here next to these two. So we're going to put that outside of the content div. We're going to make a class called stat. This is just going to contain everything inside of here. Then we're going to create a div with a class of labels. That's going to contain the labels right here. We're just going to put the labels, each label inside a span. We'll do kind. We'll do a little sun or something right here. You can put whatever you want or leave it out entirely. We're going to do a cruel variable, something like that. I've just kind of preset these variables, so that should show up here right now. We've got 70 and 30. And of course, we have to add in the percentage behind. Now the labels look okay. Then outside of labels, we are going to create another div with a class of container. And inside of that, we're going to create a div with a class of bar. So the container is going to be this whole thing right here with the white background. And the one with the class of bar is this actual bar in the middle. So this is how it looks now. Looks pretty nice. Now I'm going to walk you through the styling of this. Now I'm going to use Visual Studio Code to do the styling, just so that you can kind of see it in real time, updated as we go. But you would obviously put your code in the style sheet in Twine, but I don't want to have to keep like playing the test run for each time we make a change. So I've just got my browser set up with like an automatic browser syncing using Grunt. So that's going to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. So let me just remove the code so that we can kind of do it all together. Now the first thing I did was remember how we put this tag right here? That is what this target in CSS is going to do. So that's going to make sure that whatever is inside of these brackets is only going to affect the passage that we tagged with character codex. So inside of here, first I'm going to make sure that there is no margin in here because there is a margin on the original passage. Now when I save this, this is going to look like this. So there's no styling, no anything here. Let's begin. First thing we're going to do is style the entire card, the card class. We're going to give it a background color using the variable of main, like so. Then we're going to make sure that there is a padding so that the content isn't like right on the edge here. We're going to give it a margin of 0 auto. This just makes sure that when this is alone, it's always going to be centered in the passage. Then we're going to give it an outline of 1 pixel solid using the variable color alt. Right. Please don't mind me looking like absolute shit. I just had to pop in here and explain the fact that I've used different color variables than the ones that actually are in the template because I've been playing around with the templates, so I'm sorry if that's confusing, but you could obviously use the variables that came with the template, the --color1, --color2, etc. You get it. Also, if the code looks a little bit weird, it's because I'm using Sass instead of CSS. I'm going to explain it later, but sorry, I'm such an airhead. I hope it's not too confusing, but this is completely optional, of course. This just creates like a sort of border, but the fun thing about outline is that you can make it offset. I'm going to make it offset of about 0.5 m, which is half of the padding that we gave it. And that moves the border sort of inside of the box, which can be a fun design choice, I suppose. I'm going to give it a max width of 500 pixels because even when the screen is like really big, I don't want it to be bigger than approximately this size. Next, we're gonna style the content element inside of the card. This is where the magic happens, where we are going to make sure that the left div and the right div are actually displayed next to each other instead of like over each other the way they are right here. And to do that, we're going to use display flex, which is the flex box. Now, nothing happens yet because they both take up 100% of the width right now. But if we set content div and set the width of both these divs to like 50%, they would end up next to each other, as you can see. We're also going to make sure that we use justify content to make them centered. It's not really applicable to this, but the align items also makes sure that they are centered on this sort of vertical axis. It just looks nicer that way. Now, because this element is just the avatar and this element has a lot more content, I'm not going to do 50-50. I'm going to do 40% for this one in width and 60% for this one, so that this one always takes up more space because it has a lot of content. So we're going to style the left, this one, as you recall, like I said, with about 40%. And we're going to set the right to 60%. So that makes this part a little bit wider. Now let's start with the avatar div. I'm going to give that a background color of the variable alt. This is just a variable that I've created to hold this orange color, so you can obviously put whatever color you want. I'm going to give this a border of 1 pixel solid in the color variable of dark. I'm also going to give it like a double border, so I'm going to use outline again to do that. I'm going to set the outline to 5 pixels solid white. Now the outline is outside, but I want it inside the way it is here. So we have this dark border on the outside, but I want a white border inside of that. So to do that, we're going to do the outline offset again, and we're going to set it to -6 pixels, which is the width of the border plus this 1 pixel border right here, so that it ends up inside of that. I'm going to give this, in order to make sure that this circle is always a circle, I'm going to give it like a set width and height. I'm going to do 7 em. You can kind of play around with this if you want. It just makes sure that it's always got the same height and width. And to make it round, we're going to use border radius of 50%, and there we go. Now we can see that the initial is on like the outside here, so to make sure that that is completely centered inside of this circle, we want to make sure that this circle or the dot avatar element has a position of relative, and then we want to style the span that holds the initial. And we're going to set the position here to absolute. Now, if we didn't have this position relative, the position absolute would affect the entire page, so that this initial here would be positioned relative to the entire page, which would leave it up here in the corner, but because we gave this circle a position of relative, it will stay confined inside of here. Now we want to make sure that it's centered completely in the middle, so we're going to give it a left of 50 and a top of 50. That leaves it somewhat off center, so we're gonna use a bit of a life hack and give it a transform translate of -50 -50. That's going to make it centered completely. Now I'm going to style this with a serif font. You can of course use whatever font you want. You can use the title font if you like, if you want it to be a little bit more stylish. I like the serif font, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to set the font size to approximately half of the width and height of the circle. So I'm going to do 3.5 M, and I'm going to give it just a color of the dark variable. And there we go. Now let's do some styling on this right. First things first, I want to make sure that everything inside of here has the color of white, because I think it looks better. Then I'm going to style the H3, which contains the full name. You can't even see it right now because it has inherited the styling of the normal H3 that would be on a white background. So we want to make sure that this one has a color of white so that it overrides the color, and now we can see it. Now it also has inherited a border right here, so I'm going to give it a border of 0 to remove that. Then I'm going to give it a font of the variable title font so that it's the same as this one and this one. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm also going to give it a line height of 1 to make sure that it's not taking up too much space underneath and over. And then I'm going to give it a margin of 0.0M00 because I want the margin to be a little bit bigger on top, but not on the sides and not on the bottom. Now we want to create this nice little effect of this line right here. And to do that, we're going to target the H3 after selector. This is going to make sure that whatever we style or put in here is going to be after this H3 tag. So for this, I'm going to make sure that the content is set to 0 because we don't actually want to put anything in there. If you did put something in there, like an X, that X would just show up at the end here, but we don't want anything in there. We're just going to set it to display block so that it's taking up a full line on its own. As you can see, if I put X in here now, it would be below, taking up its own line. Then we're going to give it a width of 20%. You can use whatever you want. And just a height of 1 pixel. So this is going to be the height of the actual line. I just want it to be very thin, so I set it to 1 pixel. Then I'm going to give it a background color. So that's going to be the color of the line, and I'm going to set it to my contrast color. You can use whatever you want. And then last but not least, I'm going to give it a margin of 0.5 so that it has a little bit of margin on top and on the bottom. And I want to set the margin to the sides to auto because that's going to make it centered. And there we go. Now I'm going to style this unordered list that we created with some facts. So let's do that right here. I'm going to set the font family to monospace. That's what I used in my original design, and I think it looks kind of cute. So I'm going to do that. We're going to use Flexbox once again to make sure that these aren't stacked like this. We want them to be next to each other like that. There is some styling that's kind of inherited here, some padding and stuff that I want to override. So I'm going to target the Lee right here and give it a padding of 0.5, and I'm going to target the Lee before and give it a margin of 0 like that. Hang on, something. All right, we need to make sure that this is centered, so we're going to do justify content center, and we want there to be no margin on the UL. Damn it, what is doing that? Something is off here. This is kind of off center, and that's because I forgot to make this H3 a width of 100%. So I think that should kind of take care of it. No. There we go. That's what was missing. Text align center on this entire element right here. Great. Excellent. Now, one thing I want to fix right now is this thing is not centered, which we want it to be. So we're going to go up to content left again. We're going to use flex box and justify content center. Now let's get into styling that bar. So first of all, let's target the stat, which as you recall is the entire stat container. Inside of that, I'm gonna target labels, the labels tag. We're gonna give it a color of white. Actually, I'm gonna use the variable white. And once again, I'm going to give it a font family of monospace because I think it looks cute. Now, we obviously want these to be spread out across the entire width. So to do that, I'm going to use, you guessed it, Flexbox. I'm going to make sure that it is all centered. But obviously, like I said, we want them to be spread out. So to do this, we could just target all of the spans, all of these, and give them a width of 33%. That would spread them out. But as you can see, first of all, we have to target this second one and make sure that that is centered. We have to target this one and make sure that that has a text align of right so that it's all the way over here. Also, this icon doesn't really need to have 33% of the width because it's so small, whereas these two might contain a word that is longer. For example, if this variable was compassionate or something, it would take up a lot more space. So we're going to set this one to take up only 10% of the width, whereas these one take up 45%. So to do this, first, we're going to target the first child that is a span element of labels using the nth child. We're going to set the text align to left for this one, which it already kind of is, and we're going to set the width to 45%. Then we're going to target this one, span nth child, the second one. We're going to set the width to 10% and the text align to center. And then we're going to target the last one, number 3, and we're going to set the width to 45% and the text align to right. Now they should be spread out pretty well. I think they're a little bit too close to the edge here, so I'm going to give labels a padding of 5 pixels on the top and then 1 EM on the sides. That way it kind of has a little bit more space on the sides here. Now let's get into styling the actual stat bar like this. So first we want to target the container. We're going to set the background color to white. Now currently there's nothing inside of these elements, so they're not going to show up until we do some styling here. So in order for it to actually show up, I'm going to have to give it a set width. So I'm going to set the width to 100%. I'm going to set the height to 1.3 EM. You can set it to whatever you want. Now it's showing up. I'm going to give it a border of 1 pixel solid with a variable dark. And I know that my original one had a bit of a rounded design, so let's just give it a border radius to make it rounded. Now we can style the actual bar. We're gonna set the content to nothing, and once again, because there's actually no content inside of it, it's not going to show up. We're going to have to give it some set parameters. I'm going to give it a background color of the variable all. Then I'm going to give it a set width of 70%. That's just going to reflect this variable for now. I'm going to set it to a height of 100% and display block. That's going to make it show up. I'm going to add a little bit of a padding. 5 pixels will do. And there we go. Now everything is styled, and hopefully that made sense to you how that works. Now let's move on to talking about the sort of grid system and the container that I was mentioning right in the beginning. So let's say that we have more than one card that we want to display on this page. Right now they're stacked right next to each other, so if you want to just have them like this, you might want to add in a bit of a margin on the top and bottom for the card element, like so. What you could do as well is to use the container element that we created in the beginning and style that with a grid. So you could technically use Flexbox for this as well, but I find it easier to use grid. So you would say display grid, and the way grid works is that you tell it how many columns you want. So I'm just going to do 2 columns for this, and each column is going to be 1 fraction of the space. So 1 fraction, 1 fraction. Now they end up next to each other. We can either give it a margin to the right and left of the cards to make sure that they're not right next to each other like this. You could do that. There's also something called grid template or grid gap or something that should do the same thing. There we go. So both works. I would probably stick to this one though. So now even if we added like 2 more cards so that we had 4, they would be laid out like this. Now, you would probably want to do a different styling for mobile if you did this. Otherwise, it's not going to look great on mobile. So you might want to add in some breakpoints and media queries for that. That is a quick way of making like a grid system for your cards. Now, like I said, this was me using Sass to code in Visual Studio Code. So let me show you what the actual CSS would look like. So in Sass, you can just kind of put the card styling inside of the brackets here, and then it will render it like this. That is what Sass compiling does for you. So this is what the code actually looks like. I will put the code somehow in the description box so you can look through the actual CSS if you want to. But without further ado, let's get into making the stat bar functional. So right here we have 1 stat bar in the character codex page. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go and give the stat bar the actual bar. This is the only thing that's gonna change, that's gonna move, is this orange bar right here. So in order to make this functional and in order to make it reflect the actual number of this thing, we're gonna have to use a little bit of JavaScript. So we're gonna give this an idea of something. Now the ID has to be completely unique to this particular stat bar. So for this one, I'm going to call it kind stat. This is something that should only be used once in your code, basically. So because this stat bar reflects the kind variable, I'm going to call it kind stat. Now, in order to make this functional, we have to go and do a little bit of JavaScript. So we're going to go to Story JavaScript. So inside of your JavaScript, you're going to want to scroll down to these 2 particular functions, and in between that, we're going to create a new jQuery. Hey besties, it's me again. Sorry for the jump scare. I just had to pop in here again and explain, or rather correct myself. You don't actually have to put this code exactly here in between these 2. That's just me trying to get organized and make some sense in the chaos of this code. You can put this code anywhere in the JavaScript and it will work, so don't be confused by that, please. Rock on. event, basically, we're going to target the entire document of your game, of your page, and we're going to say on passage display, run this function. What this basically does is make sure that every time a passage is displayed, this code will run, this function will run. That's going to make sure that as the user goes through the story and the variable changes inevitably as the user makes some choices, the information in the stat bar is continuously running to show the most recent updated variable, if that makes sense. So this code is going to run each time the passage display event is run. So every time the passage or any passage is displayed, this function is going to run. So the first thing we're going to want to do inside of here is create a variable. I'm going to call this variable kind stat because that's the stat we're working on. Then we're going to say that this variable is going to contain the data, or this variable is going to get the data from the variable kind, and we're also going to plus on a percentage behind it. Then we're going to use jQuery to target the exact specific stat bar of this particular stat container by using the idea that we set before. So it's going to be kind stat. Then what we're basically going to target is the width of this stat bar right here. It's currently set to 70% because we hard-coded that in the CSS right here. But what we're going to make sure is that every time a passage is displayed, this function is going to get the actual variable data of the variable kind, and it's going to set the width of the stat bar to that particular number. And we're going to do that by setting the attribute style of width, and we're going to use this variable right here. So let's take a look now. Currently, this stat is set to 70% because I set that in the story init right there. We're going to have to add in, I forgot to add in the actual label. As you can see, it's only showing the number right now. So let's go and add that in the character codex right here. We're going to put kind and cool. Right, so now it is displaying correctly. Let's set this to 40 and this to 60. And then we can see once again that now the stat bar has indeed changed to reflect this variable right here. So basically what is happening here, if you go into your developer tools and look at this, you will see that the div class bar has been styled with inline styling with a width of 40%. So now whenever this variable is changed and the passage is displayed, this is going to change to whatever the variable holds. It's pretty simple like that, pretty basic. So it's pretty easy. The only thing is, when you create another stat, so if we did copy this thing and create another stat here, for example, let's use bold and shy for this one. Let's create those variables as well. Set bold to 50, set shy to 50. Now that we have another stat bar here, as you can see, this one is not coded. This one is not functional because it does not display the actual data, the number of this variable. So for each stat bar that you create, you have to give it an original ID. So for this, it's going to be bold stat. Then you're going to have to go into your JavaScript and do the exact same thing that we did before. Copy this bit, change all the things, make the variable called bold stat. We're going to get the data from the bold variable, change the ID to bold stat, and this as well to bold stat, which didn't work. What did I do wrong? Bold stat, bold stat. That's what I did wrong. Now, and only now, will it reflect the actual variable data. So for each stat bar that you create, you have to go into your JavaScript and create another function, and you have to give it a unique ID. So it's a whole lot of hard coding, but it does work. So that's it, I think. Let me know if you have any more questions, anything that was unclear. I hope that made sense to you the way it makes sense to me, but you never know. Anyways, thank you for watching. Bye bye.